RuneScape's upcoming skill, sailing, was never supposed to be taken seriously. It all started because one guy wanted to pull a prank on his friends, but now, nearly 2 decades later, it's going to be the largest and most game-changing update ever. Will Jagex actually be able to turn this meme into a masterpiece? Or are old-school RuneScape's best years over? This is the true history of sailing. It's July of 2008, and a player named Sumo is browsing the RuneScape website. It had just gone over its first major redesign in years to coincide with the release of RuneScape HD. Qwerty goes to the high scores to check one of his friend's stats, and notices something odd. Right above the summoning skill is a new, unreleased skill, sailing. He quickly takes a screenshot, sends it to some friends, and when he refreshes the page, it disappears. It's like it was never there. One of Qwerty's friends, Gallo, quickly puts together a YouTube video to show off this massive discovery, and soon after uploading it, it explodes in popularity among the community. Players assumed that someone at Jagex must have messed up when publishing the new version of the site, and accidentally pushed sailing live on the high scores too early. Or maybe they did it on purpose. Jagex was well known for teasing skills before their release. Prior to Summoning's release earlier that year, Jagex added the pet shop to Yanil. You couldn't go inside of it, but if you went to the second floor of the Magic Guild and switched your graphics to low detail, you could see inside. The shop's owner would also occasionally leave the shop to take a bulldog for a walk. Or, even more relevant to the situation, back in 2002, the carpentry skill was added to RuneScape's high scores before it was ready for release. However, carpentry was never actually finished and was removed from the high scores 7.5 months later. As the high score screenshot spread, players started looking for more evidence that sailing was coming soon. The first piece was right in front of their faces on RuneScape's homepage. Along with the website redesign, Jagex had also added this banner. It appears to be a wizard standing on a boat, while a dragon destroys an island. Perhaps this is the destruction of Crandor before the Dragon Slayer quest, or a teaser for sailing. Modmark H would make a post on the RuneScape forums discussing the banner that said this: "What is this mysterious staff the human is wielding? What cape is that on his back? Is that dragon Elvarg, or perhaps Mommy had a darling child growing up somewhere before some nasty player slayed her? Maybe I'm just making things up to distract you from me stealing all your gold. You'll just have to wait and see." Players took a closer look at the cape and saw what looked like a boat on the back. Was this the 99 sailing skill cape? Now the hunt was really on. Hundreds of players began looking for more evidence of sailing that Jagex had been hiding in plain sight. Along with the release of the HD update a few days prior, Jagex had filled in the black space on the world map with water and added an interactive world map to the game. Surely it was added to help players navigate the seas. A few weeks prior, pirate implings were released. Catching them would give you the chance at getting some pirate clothing. How could you go sailing without proper attire? A new chatting system intended for children and muted players called Quick Chat had also been released about 2 months earlier. As part of this feature, users could ask others for specific services, such as smithing items, and it included unique dialogue options for previously unseen items, like rune cannonballs. Obviously, your ship would need some new powerful weaponry. Lastly, players pointed to the timing of the high scores screenshot. The summoning skill had released about 6 months prior. This might seem a little fast for a new skill to come out, especially by today's standards, but back then, it was rare for there to be even a year gap between skills. During 2005 and 2006, 2 skills were released per year. The players had it all figured out. Sailing was going to be RuneScape's next skill, except it wasn't. Soon after Gallo posted his video of Sumo's discovery, Qwerty made a confession. The screenshot was entirely fake. He had created it himself to try and prank people with, and it clearly worked. But what about the new banner? Modmark H was clearly hinting at something, right? Well, a player would comment on the forum thread that a JMod is letting spoilers loose. In response, Mark would say, or maybe he is just posting nonsense to make you think he is posting spoilers. You can always trust a dishonest man to be dishonest, which coincidentally, or maybe not, is a Pirates of the Caribbean quote. Or is it Caribbean? Everybody says it differently, so I honestly don't know. That sailing icon on the back of the character's cape was likely just a crease in the fabric, and ModMarkH was known by the community at the time to be a quote, silly goose. All of the other stuff was just a coincidence too. The in-game map had been a highly requested feature for years. Pirate Implings were added along with the Rocking Out quest, which was part of the long-running Pirate quest line. And Quick Chat was just full of weird items that weren't supposed to be there. It seems that when Jagex launched Quick Chat, they forgot to remove items that never released, untradeable quest items, and items JMods used for testing or moderating the game. Using it, you could tell players things like, I like your item, mobile phone. Can I borrow pretty girl? Or even, we need to stock up on item 9mm revolver. A few days later, Mod Dave would confirm in a forum post that there was indeed no sailing skill in development, and the image from Fangallo's video was entirely fabricated. This should put the sailing rumors to rest, right? Well, for my 9-year-old self and many others, it didn't. Whether it was players not wanting to believe Jagex, or in my case, never seeing Mod Dave's post debunking it, many of us still believed sailing was real and on the way. These rumors were further exacerbated by players inspired by QWERTY Sumo making their own fake screenshots of sailing, both in-game and on the website. RuneScape actually had a very large community of fakers, people who would fake screenshots and sometimes videos of the game. These fakes were really elaborate, and oftentimes very hard to distinguish from the real game. The same way your grandma gets tricked by AI-generated slop, we got tricked by these guys. To add further confusion for players, private servers would also latch onto sailing and create their own versions of the skill over the next few years. Some of them were pretty in-depth and visually impressive, while others were, well, this. Back when I was a kid, I got sucked into the private server trap. It was fun being able to hold stuff I could never afford and go places nobody could go, and getting the occasional virus. While researching for this video, I checked up on what the scene looks like these days, and I really have to wonder what went wrong. This guy has a Slayer task for Pickle Rick. The internet can be a pretty weird place, and actually kind of scary too. Like, have you ever Googled your name? You might be surprised just how much of your personal information is out there. Bad actors could use it to dox you, steal your identity, or in extreme cases, even stalk you. You have the right to stay private, and today's sponsor, Delete Me, can help. Data brokers collect massive amounts of information on people like you and me, and then sell it to anyone who will pay for it, which means it often ends up online. Using Delete Me, you can get your data removed from the internet and help protect your privacy. I started using Delete Me a few months ago, and they've since removed over 100 listings about me from data brokers' websites, which has helped me sleep a little bit better at night. Remove your personal information from the web at joindeleteme.com/Colonello and use code Colonello for 20% off. Anyway, in April of 2010, Jagex would release the Dungeoneering skill, proving once and for all that sailing was not the game's next skill. But no matter how many times Jagex debunked sailing, someone would still ask when it was coming out. So they decided to lean into the joke. In 2011's April Fool's post, they mentioned sailing would be coming out later that month. In the Cryptic Clue Fest 3, sailing was the answer to the crossword clue, the skill that never was. In December of 2012, Jagex released Player-Owned Ports, a ship management minigame inspired by sailing. Both the teaser video and the minigame itself are full of references to the skill. And really, the list of sailing-related references just goes on and on. So let's skip to the most important one on it. Players who logged into old-school RuneScape on April 1st, 2014 would be greeted with this message. Start training the sailing skill today. Ships depart for eastern lands from south of Draenor. After speaking to the captain south of Draenor, you'd hop on a boat and sail on over to an island in the eastern lands, which was actually just a small island near the water altar. And here, you'd get a short cutscene with an NPC, then you'd sail back home. For doing this, you'd be rewarded with sailing XP. Now, you could only get up to 5,000 XP in sailing. If you tried to gain more, you'd get a message in your chat box reading critical error, sailing XP overflow, resetting to safe state, and your level would reset back to 1. Now, I have some heavy nostalgia for this event. When I think of my fond RuneScape memories, this event quickly comes to mind. I had found out that sailing was just an elaborate joke a few years earlier, but as a kid, I spent a lot of time watching those sailing evidence videos and genuinely looked forward forward to seeing it in game one day. Part of it might be because I was going through a pirate phase around the same time I was watching those videos. And as a teenager, but slightly different pirate, I had dressed up as Captain Hook for Halloween, saw the pirate ship show on the Vegas Strip back when that existed, and before it had strippers, and my dad is a Pirates fan, but I'm drifting off course here. It seems I wasn't the only one who adored this event, because it resonated really well with most of the player base at the time. So much so that Jagex and the players started considering, what if sailing wasn't just a joke? In 2015, both the RuneScape 3 and old school RuneScape teams were considering introducing sailing to their respective games. Now, RuneScape 3's version didn't get very far. They were considering the skill along with necromancy, archaeology, and invention, and ultimately, invention was the skill they decided to develop. But sailing in old school got so far that players actually got to vote on if they wanted it in the game or not, and it's a lot different from 2023's version of sailing. In August of 2015, someone asked during a Q&A livestream, will old school RuneScape ever get a new skill? The team had tried to introduce a new skill around the same time in 2014, Artisan, which was basically Slayer, but for skilling. However, it failed both polls it was included in. Back to the stream, ModMattK says that it's up to the players if they want a new skill, and that the team may present their ideas for one soon. In the meantime, they would run a straw poll, asking players what skill they'd like to see come to the game, with examples like dungeoneering, sailing, summoning, divination, and evolution of combat. Dungeoneering placed first, and evolution of combat placed second. The poll wasn't preserved, so it's unknown exactly where sailing placed. However, we know it wasn't very high. This was probably not the greatest news for the team, given that the very next day, they would release a developer blog proposing that sailing should be old school's next skill. Sailing was picked because the very core concept of the skill was exploration and adventure, which I think is pretty smart. Some of my best memories of this game are from exploring it for the first time, my first steps in the wilderness, visiting the crowded Grand Exchange for the first time, and unlocking places I had only ever seen in RuneScape music videos. Now, movement at sea would function basically the same as it does today when you click to walk somewhere, but you'd be controlling a boat instead of a human character. You would train sailing through three main methods: shipbuilding, navigation, and exploration. For shipbuilding, you could hire workers at the many already existing shipyards, provide them resources, and they could build and upgrade your ship. You could then take the ship out to sea yourself or sell it to one of many potential NPC buyers. Shipbuilding would be a lot like farming. You'd start your build, check in on it every now and then, and when it's done, get a big chunk of XP. Navigation would be done by traveling routes. For example, traveling from Port Sarim to Ardone. Along the way, you'd be able to take part in events and challenges in exchange for some XP. And upon reaching your destination, you'd also be rewarded with a large chunk of XP. Think of it like temple trekking, but at sea. You would also be able to complete missions for NPCs. Like maybe, while you're in Ardone, you stop for a chat with Charlie the Zookeeper, and find out he wants you to get him 100 monkey nuts from Apatol. The last method, exploration, was the largest and most exciting. You would go out into open waters and traverse through randomly generated seas full of challenges, like underwater caverns full of enemies and loot, defend an island settlement from an attack, fight sea monsters, escape from cyclones, and even search for buried treasure. I'd compare this to the dungeoneering skill in RuneScape 3 or the yet-to-be-released Chambers of Xeric raid. PvP ship battles were also briefly mentioned, but were not going to be included in the skill's launch. But why train sailing aside from watching that level number go up? Through sailing, you would unlock new areas like the yet-to-be-released Fossil Island and the lost island of Atlantis. Which, real quick, what is it with Jagex and the letter Y? They changed vampires into vampires for no known reason, and now Atlantis? You would also be able to unlock new powerful prayers, augury, and rigor, new best-in-slot Zenite jewelry, new training areas for existing skills, and so much more. Over the next few weeks, the team would post a few more developer blogs elaborating on how the skill would be trained and answering players' many questions. One of these blogs would even include the iconic banner that everyone swore had a sailing skill cape, but this time, Jagex actually photoshopped the cape to very clearly contain a boat. unless it was that way the whole time. Just barely a month after the first developer blog released, they would poll the player base on if the sailing skill, as they pitched it, should release. Although it performed better in the polls than Artisan, it failed with only a 67.9% yes vote. Something to keep in mind is that polls needed a 75% yes vote to pass. But why did it fail? First and most important is probably the game-changing nature of the update. Sailing would fundamentally change the way you play old school RuneScape forever, and too many of the skill specifics were hazy at best. Very important questions players asked were met with answers like maybe, probably, it hasn't been decided yet, or if the community wants it. Like, how long will it take to level up? Do you lose items on death? Will clue scrolls get new sailing related steps? Can the water graphics be updated? And so on. Another massive concern was the size and capabilities of the team. Today, the old school RuneScape team has nearly 100 people on it, but back in 2015, they had just 13. Craziest of all, they wanted the skill to launch in January of 2016, giving the team at most 4.5 months to develop the entire thing. Old school was very much in its infancy still. It had only been out for 2.5 years at this time. It was so early that the team hadn't even released a single new quest for the game yet. Unlike RuneScape 2, which had now become RuneScape 3, the client didn't even have a world map built in yet either. How were we supposed to sail the high seas without a map? Players said, wait a minute, there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be addressed first before you even think of doing something as large and important as a new skill. Even I, a longtime sailing enthusiast, was a little wary about the skill actually coming to the game, especially now that I was older. The skill actually being added to the game at this point in time, for all the reasons I just listed, would have been a total disaster. As old school continued to grow and the years passed, the team's desire to add a new skill to the game didn't go away. In 2018, they would announce warding, a skill that would allow players to create magical items like robes and armors, but this failed the polls in 2019 with an even lower yes vote than sailing, with only 66.4%. Their approach to pitching new skills clearly wasn't working, so they realized they needed to try something different. Rather than spending hundreds of hours developing a skill, polling it, and then hoping it doesn't fail, why not figure out if the players even wanted a new skill in the first place? As soon as warding was pitched, a large chunk of discussion surrounding it on social media was a commonly repeated phrase: nobody wants a new skill. Although I wasn't as vocal about it as some other players, I felt similarly, especially if that skill was going to be warding. Warding to me felt like something that would fit into already existing skills like magic or crafting. It just wasn't something, in my opinion, that would require its own skill. During 2022's Winter Summit, Jagex said that they would once again try to add a new skill to old school RuneScape, but this time they'd learned from their past attempts. Instead of announcing what the next skill they were working on was going to be, they said, "We don't know what the game's next skill is yet. Before getting to that, we're going to do a poll asking you one simple question. Do you want a new skill in old school RuneScape? If so, we'll be working with the community from the start to figure out what that skill should be." When they polled the player base on if we wanted a new skill, it easily passed with an 80.9% yes vote. So now they needed to figure out what that skill the players actually wanted was. They would do this through an in-game poll and a few surveys. Players were also able to submit their own suggestions for what the skill should be to Reddit. Some were well thought out and fit the game really well, while others, I guess, just were not. The most popular idea was actually sailing. Now that old school was more mature, the team was much larger, and Jagex were committed to getting things right and not just launching a skill 4 months after coming up with the idea, players really wanted to see what sailing could be like. A few months passed, and using player feedback, the team presented their 3 best skill ideas to the community: taming, shamanism, and of course, sailing. Taming would allow you to befriend many of the game's already existing creatures. You would care for them, provide them a home, and train them. By doing so, they would be able to help you do things like dig up treasure, help you hunt, or maybe even help in combat. This may sound a lot like summoning from RuneScape 3, but the team was very clear it would be nothing like it. Sailing you're already familiar with, but the main concept for this skill this time was that you would navigate to a port, acquire a boat, and earn XP by having fun at sea. The team was very clear that this version would be much different from 2015. means, but I want to save the specifics for just a bit. Shamanism was the team's wildcard pitch. By harnessing the power of nature, you'd be able to create new items and enhance your current gear. By training the skill, you'd also unlock access to the spirit realm, where you could communicate with spirits. Players compared it to a combination of invention, divination, and even a little bit of summoning. I know a lot of people liked it, but it just didn't really resonate with me aside from maybe the rewards. Ultimately, it was a pretty tight race between sailing and shamanism, but sailing won by just 0.2%. Now that sailing had won the poll, it would enter the refinement stage. Here, Jagex moderators would really nail down exactly what sailing is before throwing it to one final poll that would actually decide if it would come into the game. In August of 2023, they would run this poll where it would pass with a 71.9% yes vote. But wait, 71.9? Didn't the other polls need a 75% yes vote to pass? Yeah, and here's where things get weird. A lot of people had a problem with the way sailing was polled. In October of 2022, Jagex changed polls so that they would only need a 70% yes vote to pass, instead of 75. The official reason for this was due to low voter turnout. Fewer than 6% of active members actually vote in polls. With a 75% yes pass rate, it only takes 1.5% of the game's active members voting no to stop a piece of content from getting into the game. By reducing the amount of votes needed for something to pass, it reduces the likelihood of such a small number of players from having a stranglehold over the game's future content, but still requires a supermajority for anything to pass. However, many players came up with a conspiracy theory that this change was made solely so that sailing would pass. If this change hadn't been made, sailing would have failed the polls again. Sailing was also question 6 in a Giga poll, so some players felt that Jagex was hiding it to try and somehow secure more yes votes. To go even deeper down the rabbit hole, some players suspect that Jagex didn't just count votes for the sailing skill, they also added extra ones. Now, I believe the question was significant enough to warrant its own poll, but I don't buy into any of the conspiracy theories about why it actually passed. Instead, Wild Mudkip has a really good take that I also agree with. In part of his Sailing is the End of Old School RuneScape video, he more or less said it's in Jagex's best interest to do what the majority of the player base wants, in order to both retain memberships and expand the game to new players. And there have been plenty of polls in Old School's history that, if they passed, would bring Jagex a substantially larger amount of money for much less effort. Remember the partnerships poll? And what about every other skill the team proposed, especially when the game was in serious trouble? In August of 2014, when Jagex polled the artisan skill, the average online player count was a minuscule 17,000. Why not rig the poll then when they had virtually nothing to lose? The team would get to put out a fun, quirky update and milk the game for some quick membership funds before shutting it down. In my opinion, and I hope you'll agree, rigging the polls is not in the best interest of both Jagex and the player base. Let's be real, a lot of us are in this game for life, and Jagex would have to mess up really badly for that to change. I just can't see them taking such a big risk for such a small payoff. With that out of the way, let's talk about what sailing will truly be like. I wanted to save this part for later because so much has changed since it was originally being considered again in early 2023. I even think that veteran players will learn something from this section. Since sailing started its refinement phase in 2023, there have been countless discussion posts, podcasts, news posts, and Q&As going over what the skill is going to be like. It was honestly getting pretty overwhelming going through all of them while making this video, but it is beyond clear to me that Jagex is extremely serious about getting this skill right and making sure that it's something the players will love. Also keep in mind that what I'm about to show you on screen is very early pre-alpha footage from Jagex or scenes created by my good friend and editor Fart Shartley. Yes, that is his name. Things I discuss may change in the future, but this is what Jagex has planned for now. Well, first things first, you need a boat. You can acquire one by building, buying, stealing, or by completing the skill's introductory quest, Maiden Voyage. Unlike last time, boat building will not be a major way to train the skill. The bulk of the XP you'll gain in this skill will be out at sea. Ships will also be split into 3 different categories: small vessels for shallow bays, large vessels for the open sea, and colossal vessels for the deep ocean. You'll unlock bigger ships as you train the skill, and you're not limited to one of each vessel type. Once you're out on the ocean, you'll notice another big difference from 2015's sailing pitch. Instead of your character being transformed into a boat, you'll be placed on a boat where you can move around on board. You can bring along friends, NPC crewmates, and even board other ships. Other players will also be able to interact with and see you from your boat from the shore. Ship movement will be controlled with your mouse, and will be much smoother than 2015's proposed version of just copying how players move on land. Now, every skill has a core gameplay loop, a repetitive action that generates XP, like how you light fires in fire making or build furniture in construction. Sailing's version of this will be interacting with any of the facilities on your ship. That could be trimming your sails or firing your cannons. But like every skill, sailing is much more than a repetitive gameplay loop. There needs to be multiple ways to train the skill that appeals to both AFKers and sweats. The old school team has categorized these into primary, secondary, and tertiary gameplay. Primary gameplay is gameplay that involves just sailing alone, not any other skills, and all 5 methods will be available on release day. They include charting the sea, where you'll document its waters and islands and expand your captain's log; shipwreck salvaging, where you'll scavenge through abandoned shipwrecks in search of treasure; port tasks, where you'll help NPCs by delivering goods from one port to another, locating lost shipments, and more; ship racing with the thrill-seeking barracudas; and naval combat, where you'll defend your ship from pirates, sea monsters, and maybe even sea legends. Secondary gameplay is gameplay that combines sailing with other skills, and you'll gain experience in both while training. These will all be pulled separately from the skill at a later date. They include deep sea trawling, where you'll catch rare fish while making use of your fishing skill; mineral dredging, which allows you to mine precious rocks and gems from the ocean floor, making use of your mining skill; sea monster hunting, which makes use of your slayer and hunter skills; and coral farming, where you'll cultivate your own coral using your farming skill. Tertiary gameplay is made up of activities that are more complex and feel like their own standalone pieces of content. These won't be ready on release and include things like aquariums, where you can show off your rare fish and sailing achievements; treasure hunting, which is an ocean-based and separate version of clue scrolls; ship PvP, where you can sink other players' ships and claim their loot; expeditions, instanced randomly generated areas of the sea and islands, which is pretty similar to 2015's exploration training method; and last but not least, an ocean raid. It's like raids, but at sea. But what about rewards? Sailing will also launch with a bunch of new types of raw materials, which can be used both within the sailing skill to upgrade and improve your ship, as well as with other skills. As you level up, you'll also unlock new island content. I don't want to talk too much about rewards, as the team seems to still be in the very early stages on deciding them. There's still no release date planned, and although I'm wary about such a game-changing update, I'm actually looking forward to achieving my childhood dream of sailing the seas in RuneScape, and I can definitely respect the journey it took to get here. Thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. To get your data removed from the internet, check out Delete Me via my link in the description and get 20% off.